Chapter 391 Are You a Zombie? By Heidesgrain. Jason didn't plan to reveal everything he knew to the others, but he couldn't help but feel like the foreign races were truly perfect at playing push and pull. First, the foreign races acted as if they were barely strong enough to be on par with the strongest human powerhouses in order to make trading agreements with them, and now they thought it was necessary to lie that badly. Were they trying to be considerate? What crap! However, in the end, he had to acknowledge that the foreign race's behavior was extremely smart, which included the way they had played the big clans. Those foreign races even divided the human race amongst each other without creating a war on Argos. That was at least as long as nobody started to be greedy. Nevertheless, Jason couldn't help but think that everyone was too naive, thinking that the gains from the trading agreement with the foreign races were enough to start a riot against the foreign races. At most, those big clans that colluded with the foreign races were business partners, more likely their underlings. Right now Jason could reveal almost everything without being looked at suspiciously, which was all thanks to Yvonne, who was firmly convinced that Jason hailed from an ancient clan. Furthermore, she thought that he might be one of their most talented, young prodigies. This would also explain why he knew more information. According to what she knew, the ancient clans were more knowledgeable than most big clans in almost every aspect. She was not sure about their combat strength, but in her opinion, they should be stronger too. The sole reason for those ancient clans to be unbothered about reigning Canir and the archipelago was probably the fact that governing humans was seen as a hassle, wasting too much precious time that could have been used to absorb mana 100x times. So several hundred planets and hundreds of millennia, shouldn't that mean that they're much stronger than what they show us? We're at the sovereign rank after around 3 centuries. What? Yvonne was visibly shocked, but Iska and Milan didn't fare better than her. Instead, they looked even worse. Jason perceived everything through his mana fluctuations that scanned the whole area around him and couldn't help but slap his 2 friends back with all his might. With a loud smack that echoed through the surrounding, Iska and Milan screamed out as Jason said, "How about you two calm down? What happens to you guys after I depart? If I hear you guys slack off, just because of the things I told you, I'll tear you apart. Or even worse, make fun of you guys." Smiling lightly to ease the tension that had accumulated within Iska and Milan during the past few minutes, they looked at each other while rubbing the sore spot Jason had hit, before laughing out loud. Jason felt good right now because he sensed that Iska and Milan were real friends. However, he couldn't even enjoy it as he sensed that the race individual weakening curse, which the Soul World Core had inherited from the unhatched petrification serpent, was showing signs of its effect. His smile vanished while the petrification curse in his eyes intensified. Holding his head with his hands, blood started to pour out of them again. "Can we depart, please?" Jason had yet to say how his eyes had been so badly injured, but that was not important right now. Iska and Milan tried to help Jason, only to feel that their body stiffened as if something electrocuted them when they touched their friend. This was weird, but they ignored this weird sensation and gave their best to help Jason out. Suddenly, Yvonne picked up Jason, who was baffled for a short moment. "Asga, right. Let's go." After taking the first steps she mumbled, slightly embarrassed that she had to ask this. "That might be the worst time to ask this, but Milan never lied to me because of someone else, and he doesn't have many friends, so give him your contact details, please." Even though the pain in his eyes increased, Jason was still able to understand what Yvonne said. "Is that motherly love? Weird," she said. "Please, too." "That's unexpected," he told himself quietly as he answered. "I already gave them my contacts, I'll save them in the other quantum bracelet too." Instead of new quantum bracelet, Jason said other, in order to maintain his identity as an assumed descendant of an ancient family. Yvonne dual-sighed in relief before she rushed towards the transportation circle, which she activated by injecting her mana. "I know your situation is not really the best, and I would accommodate you to your clan, but I want to wait for my other son to come out of the rift. From what I heard earlier, the rift is too dangerous and I don't feel comfortable." Jason nodded his head before he heard Iska and Milan bidding farewell to him too. In the end, he could only shake his head and think that both were way too nice. What would happen if they would end up as enemies? Was that even something they imagined? Jason didn't know, but he knew that some big clans had been tricked into signing problematic soul contracts that forced them to follow the foreign race they were contracted with into war, if necessary. Their contracts might be shallow too, but nobody except those who signed them knew about the truth. According to what Yvonne told them, war was exactly what the big clans were trying to start against the Shadow Walker and their alliance. Jason was also relatively sure that the Shadow Walker and other races that belonged to their alliance came to Canir because of his existence. As long as one halfling can be born, it is possible to breed more. Was probably what the Shadow Walker race thought, and Jason was not sure whether this made sense or not. It might be possible, but such an existence should have been known. There could also be the sole exception of accidentally encountering a suitable race whose genetics were not too far apart, allowing a halfling's birth. But that wouldn't make sense either, because humans were compared to toys while the Celestia race was obviously much stronger than the Shadow Walker race as they feared them. In that sense, the genetic pool should be far apart, and this assumption Jason did, should have been wrong too. That was if he didn't miss an important fact that might change everything. The teleportation magic circle Yvonne had activated manifested around Jason, teleporting him back to Asgard where his mana fluctuations couldn't sense anyone's existence. However, in order to be sure that nobody was around, he released poisonous mist which would force others that might be inside the room to move or protect themselves. He would be able to hear the sound of corroding clothes too. As such, he could be relatively sure that there was nobody inside the room he was currently in as he opened his eyes by force. It was still hurting and the flames enveloping his eyes were obstructing his sight, but he was able to take out his quantum bracelet and message his masters that he had returned. After that, he closed his eyes again, extinguished the thick poisonous mist and left the room before he walked outside the small, shabby house as if nothing happened. Once he was far away from the house to feel safe, he opened his eyes to call a shuttle that brought him to the dome right next to a 1-star wild zone. This took less than 20 minutes and Jason was relatively sure that Shane would be there soon. As such, he forced his eyes to remain open before he exerted the weightless steps technique to accelerate his speed by 60%. Running through the dome wall and 1-star wild zone, his mana eyes perceived familiar mana fluctuations which caused Jason to smile, even though everything was painful. His eyes felt like they were pierced by several thousand needles from the inside and outside, while his soul world core unleashed the race-specific weakening curse, drastically reducing his soul amplification to 0%. Overwhelmed by the sudden exhaustion that was his body's reaction to the sudden weakened state, Jason was barely able to see that Shane appeared before him. "Wow, Jason, are you a zombie?" After that he was unable to stay conscious as he fainted with a smile on his face. Chapter 392 Curse Regulation by Hydesgrain. An unknown amount of time flew by before Jason woke up inside the large and soft bed that was placed in his small, but comfortable room. He felt still exhausted and Jason knew that this sensation wouldn't disappear within the next few days. This was because his whole soul amplification had been nullified by the race-specific weakening curse. Jason's eyes weren't hurting anymore and he could take a look around, trying to figure out where his masters were. Getting out of the bed, he noticed the dried blood below his eyes, thus he washed up and changed into a clean set of clothes. "I can sense that the petrification curse has set its roots within my eyes, while my soul world core seems to harbor the race-specific weakening curse, but what did the soul world core do with 10,000 units of my soul energy?" Even if he was still exhausted and felt like he could sleep for several days, getting to know what exactly was going on with his body was important. Looking inside the mirror, Jason noticed that nothing about his eyes or appearance seemed to have changed. However, what was different from before was that his eyesight seemed to have improved again. Other than that, he couldn't help but feel the desire to test out the petrification curse he had inherited from the unhatched petrification serpent that was completely silent. From the look of it, Jason could compare this state similar to human behavior of denying a traumatic event before one would have to accept it slowly. This assumption might as well be wrong, but it was not really important right now because Artemis, Scorpio, and even Solaris were next to the egg, consoling the petrification serpent. They weren't next to him to demand carcasses but were taking care of their new member of their family. As such, Jason could take care of his own things for now, and he was about to leave the soul world when he noticed the changes about his soul world core. Approaching it, he was unable to tell what the change of his soul world core was aiming at. There were two new, larger runes carved onto the soul world core that was already filled with all kinds of mysterious runes and carvings. Yet, what made those two carvings special was the fact that the race-specific weakening curse had been transferred within those runes. Lifting his hand, he touched them lightly with the tip of his fingers as a stream of information flooded his mind. It was as if he received incomplete notes about how to use those two runes properly. The only issue was that these notes were incomplete, and lots of information were missing. Apparently, his soul world core absorbed 10,000 soul energy units, when the petrification serpent's weakening curse had been inherited to the core, recording everything that happened afterwards to the smallest detail. This astonished Jason, and he couldn't help but think that his soul world core was amazing as he began to skim through the memories which the notes transplanted to him. From what he understood, the two runes were similar to a deceive that regulated specific things. It was as if those two runes were a controller with two possible settings. One rune was currently glowing in a faint, dark green, almost black color, while the other new rune had neither the curse transferred from the soul world core nor was it glowing. However, this was something he had already expected after he digested the recorded information within the notes. Only one set could be activated at a time, and the number of possible settings was unknown to Jason. It felt like those two runes representing the possible sections were only the bare minimum, while he had yet to configure the second, empty rune. Jason was not sure how he could configure the second rune, but that was not something he had to find out within the next few minutes. After he found out that his soul world's amplification didn't have to remain nullified, Jason was relieved. He had already imagined the worst of the worst and thought that he had made a huge mistake. However, the curse he had inherited was a race-specific weakening curse that didn't have the constant decreasement which he had noticed when the petrification serpent had cursed him before. This allowed him to stay calm from the beginning. It would be weird if the curse changed substantially after he inherited it. Furthermore, from what Iska told him, a soul world amplification curse was stagnant. Yet, Jason knew that he was different. He was neither a human nor from the Celestia race but a halfling. This was probably why he had been so confident that he wouldn't receive the petrification serpent's full curse. That his soul world core was able to hold against all kinds of curses that targeted the soul world amplification even before binding a cursed beast to his soul, allowed him to be confident enough that the soul world core would be able to negate the curse for a short period. With that thought in mind, he was fine with training how to manually negate the amplification curse to a certain extent, which was fortunately not necessary. His soul world core made it much easier for him to handle everything, and the only thing he had to do was to fill the second rune with the desired characteristics of the race-specific weakening curse and select his choice. In that sense, Jason began to wonder how often he would be able to change the settings, or if that was something he could do whenever he wanted. However, after he perceived something else about his soul world core that had changed, Jason knew that the latter was not something he could do. The weakening curse within the soul world core was surrounded by a small translucent marble with one small, faint glowing rune engraved in it. This rune was slowly enlarging and the glow was becoming more vibrant, but from what Jason perceived with his great eyesight, the pace was negligible. From the looks of it, this marble was what the two runes controlled, which meant that the curse that was currently stored within the small marble was activated as Jason had already noted. Does that mean I need to wait until the rune engraved on the marble has stored enough energy to enlarge itself again? Only then will I be able to use a different setting. Isn't that a little bit too harsh? Will this pace even accelerate if I become stronger, or is the period the same until the day I die? Jason couldn't help but feel that he had been conned, which stemmed mainly from the fact that it should take half a year before he would be able to use a different setting. This meant that he had to wait half a year to change from his nullified amplification state to a different one. At least I can absorb mana much faster now. The difference between having a mana core size of a lowest Lich stage or a mana core size of an average 4th master is enormous. My combat prowess might have decreased drastically, but who said that I have to fight someone in the next few months? Telling this to himself, Jason decided that he would use the next 6 months to break through as many levels as possible while continuing to practice the body refining technique, Netherworld's Fort. Thinking about the things he wanted to do, he suddenly recalled the splitting mind technique. Thus, he rushed outside his room, not minding the exhaustion that weakened his body further. He searched for his masters to tell them everything that had happened to him before he wanted to ask them if they had been able to procure a brain protection treasure as they promised. Furthermore, there were also other things he was curious about, like what had happened to Canir and if the big clans were really going to wage war against the foreign races that infiltrated Canir with a much higher number than they normally did. Jason was not sure how smart this was because the Shadow Walker and their allied forces were likely to have formed a soul contract with other big families that would have to start fighting against the other big clans in the worst-case scenario. Other than that, there was also his worry that the Shadow Walker sent out their forces to take care of mankind. If the basic instruction within the Terragrade manuals Jason possessed was already talking about the 4 stages, Mortal, Lich, Prisma, and Ascendian as if they were nothing special, for an extinct race at that, he didn't want to find out what kind of combat prowess races like the Shadow Walker's warriors could attain. Chapter 393 Isn't That Cheating? By Hydesgrain. When he found his masters, who were currently observing Emily's concocting process of a potion, Jason couldn't help but be interested. It was unsurprising that Dahlia taught Emily, whom she treated like a princess, how to concoct, but Jason was curious about how she was faring. Emily was unable to purify the potions she was currently concocting, but there was no mistake, at most something negligible that wouldn't make a difference to the potion's efficiency. Concocting a grade 1 potion after learning how to concoct for half a year was not bad, considering that Emily didn't have a superior mana mastery, mana eyes to perceive the mana flow perfectly, and origin flame which made everything easier. She was truly fast. Jason was a unique case with several advantages that made even his masters jealous. Thus, Dahlia was glad that she was able to teach Emily at a normal pace. She took Emily in as her second disciple because her ambition and determination to become stronger were truly shocking. After the Golden Soul Shop reduced their exhibited goods drastically, the number of customers became fewer too. As such, Emily didn't have to come to the shop, which was something Dahlia had decided. Focusing on becoming stronger, Emily's mana core rank increased to the 7th expert rank while the emerald-colored egg she had bound finally hatched. It took a long time, but the hatched beast was a lesser typhoon roc, which astonished both Dahlia and Shane. Rocs were seen as extremely powerful beasts, superior to eagles, and labeled as overlord of the sky. Only dragons and other mythical beings were comparable to a roc. It was said that only a few rocs had ever been seen on Argos, but when someone saw them demonstrating their strength, it had always been terrifying and devastating to their surroundings. As such, everyone was overjoyed after the lesser typhoon roc hatched, only for Dahlia to freak out when she remembered that Emily's vessel would hardly be strong enough to receive the amplification of a mythical beast at the Guardian stage. In that case, it was a blessing in disguise when Emily told Dahlia and Shane how much of a soul amplification she received from the lesser typhoon roc. Emily was unable to tell the exact number, but comparing the increase her mana core size received to the rank the lesser typhoon roc had, they could estimate that Emily's amplification was about 5%. This was not much, but perfect for Emily, who was unlikely to face any problems with a bursting vessel in the future. As such, the pressure on her lifted because her mana absorption wouldn't be slowed down like it was the case with Jason. She would have to tell her soulbond to halt its advancement before entering the lick stage, but that was not really an issue. Furthermore, she would be able to increase her mana core rank quickly once her soulbond halted its own advancement due to the large difference of a 5% soul amplification with a single soulbond to that of a 33% soul amplification with two soulbonds. Less than 20 minutes had passed before Emily finished concocting the potion. Wiping away the sweat on her forehead, she turned around to Dahlia, only to see that Jason stood in the doorframe. "Jason! You're awake!" She shouted out with a smile on her face, which confused Jason a lot. "Why are you so happy?" Turning around, Shane and Dahlia saw that Jason stood behind them, but instead of being overjoyed, their expression was a little bit sad. "You were supposed to lower your soul amplification, not nullify it," Shane said as his lips curled downwards. Meanwhile, Dahlia gave him a hug saying, "It was probably hard on you, huh? What the hell is going on with them?" Jason was utterly dumbfounded about their behavior, but thinking about it for a short moment he understood it. Initially, they wanted to decrease his soul amplification to around 10% minus 15%, and knowing that a curse was stagnant, both Shane and Dahlia were sure that Jason did something he shouldn't have. However, thinking that he would have never bound a cursed beast without proper reasoning, it had probably been a necessity to survive. Yet, Jason was still happy as he said teasingly, "Even if my soul amplification would be nullified, it could be cursed to increase it again, which is however not necessary." With this Jason was talking about Iska's case. He used the Debilitation Centaur's soul amplification curse to increase his amplification from 0 to 10% as it was impossible to have a negative soul amplification. At least that was what Iska's father found out. Jason's soul amplification was a different case, and in the beginning, he had even thought that his soul amplification would be decreased by 50% as it was the case with Artemis' 100% soul amplification when she was inside his mana core. This would, under normal circumstances, mean that his soul amplification should hit 0% from 33% and then, decreased, to 17%, which would have been perfect. However, it seemed like weakening an existing amplification below 0% was not possible, and Iska's case with a soul amplification of 0% was something rarely seen. Smiling at his masters because they were worried about this, Jason could only wave his hand, indicating that they shouldn't be so worried. "I think it would be better if I explain what happened inside the Mythic Garden. After that, everything will be much clearer and it will be easier to demonstrate what is going on. After that, I need an explanation about the Shadow Walker's infiltration and what other races I have to pay attention to." When they saw how serious and confident Jason was, his masters couldn't help but feel that he had matured a lot during the last 6 months. Meanwhile, Emily couldn't help but think that Jason's current combat prowess was probably only a little bit higher than her own, which made her extremely happy. She worked so hard during the last few months to become stronger with the goal to defeat Jason. Emily was not sure why that was one of her goals when she started to practice mana, but he had saved her and she wanted to repay this debt by all means. Other than that, Dahlia and Shane were praising her a lot, but deep within her, Emily knew that her own talent was nothing compared to Jason's. Otherwise, Dahlia and Shane would be astonished to see her improving so fast, which did not happen. Through this, she felt the need to become stronger at a rapid pace, increasing manifold, only to see that Jason had already returned. He had reached the mana core rank of a second master even though he was barely 15 years old, and this was without adding the high soul amplification he previously had into account. They entered the living room and sat down. Dahlia took out a few freshly cooked dishes which were left from their lunch and placed them in front of Jason, who eyed them with desire. Devouring every single dish Dahlia took out of her storage ring, the others could only stare at him wondrous as Jason revealed the fact that he didn't eat much throughout the last 6 months. There hadn't been enough time or safe places where he could have cooked something, while the other dishes he brought to the mythic garden had to be rationed. But that was not important because the surrounding mana and the nutrition he obtained through the medical solutions were more than enough to stay alive. Rather than that, he was full of energy within the mythic garden, which was the most important point that changed compared to now. After explaining every little detail to his masters and Emily, 3 hours had passed. Is that good? Or bad? Dahlia mumbled when Shane thought, should we lecture him for being too full of himself or praise him for achieving such a great feat? Jason could tell that his masters were contemplating about something after they heard his story, which caused him to smile dryly. Meanwhile, Emily could only stare at him with doubt. So the Origin Flame evolved and your mana core has the size of an average 4th master rank even without a single amplification. Now your Soul World core can also switch between the percentage your Soul World amplification is decreased. That's cheating. Emily had hoped to catch up to Jason, who was even younger than she was, but now this goal moved far into the distance. This was frustrating, and it was difficult not to see how baffled Shane and Dahlia were about this revelation. The pride she had built up in the last 6 months was instantly shattered, but instead of being discouraged, or holding a grudge against Jason, she couldn't help but feel even more motivated. Furthermore, from Jason's explanation, she could imagine how hard he had worked, and the final results were obvious. As such, she didn't feel that Jason was more like a role model, who had saved her, than someone she should hold a grudge against. Suddenly, after Jason had explained everything about the curse and his Soul World core, that was able to switch between 2 different settings to curse his amplification, he said, "If possible, I want to create my second sub-area with the mind-splitting technique as soon as possible. After that, it would be best for me to go into solitary cultivation at a secure place with a huge amount of mana." It looked like Jason had already made a plan to utilize his current state perfectly when Shane asked, "You want to return to Asterix, or more likely Syro City, and make use of the huge mana vein?" With a sly smile on his, Jason gave Shane a thumbs up, showing that this was exactly what he planned to do when Dahlia said, "We found a suitable fruit to protect your brain, but are you sure that you want to go to the Drake family's territory after what happened? You haven't heard what happened during the last few months. Everything is in chaos thanks to the Shadow Walkers, their alliance, and how a few big clans started to act suddenly, right?" Chapter 394 Confusion by Hydesgrain. Jason was not really astonished to hear that Canir and the archipelagos changed substantially after Yvonne had explained everything. It was one thing that the Shadow Walker and a few other foreign races appeared, which Jason assumed to be his fault to some extent, but that the majority of big clans expected to stand a chance against those foreign races was ridiculous. 1 or 2 Shadow Walkers with 7 or 8 solidified prismarine crystals should be enough to annihilate mankind. Is it even necessary for them to send their powerhouses? This was something Jason was unsure about, but he couldn't help but feel that it was frustrating. After Jason had explained everything that happened during the last few months, both Shane and Dahlia's mood became better, which was clearly visible. As such, they started talking about what happened on Canir and the archipelago while he was inside the mythic garden. 1 hour later, Jason couldn't help but scratch the back of his head in confusion as he mumbled, "It's neither great nor bad, why is it so confusing?" Everything Shane and Dahlia told him seemed to be extremely confusing, and Jason took a while to get the hang of everything. Apparently, 3 foreign races invaded Canir and the surrounding islands with more than 100 individuals in total. Namely, those foreign races were the Shadow Walkers, Doom Crawls, and Viradi. The majority of invaders were Shadow Walkers that had around 3 solidified prismarine crystals in their mana core. This was equal to the cultivation rank of mankind's powerhouses. However, every Shadow Walker had a refined physique that enhanced the shadow or darkness affinity they were born with by a large margin. Not only was their affinity comparable to that of mythical beasts at the same stage, but they learned how to utilize their affinities much better than humans did. In the end, The body-refining techniques mankind obtained by trading with foreign races were the most basic, which was something all foreign races did intentionally in order to prevent mankind from becoming too strong. This was one of the few things they had agreed on doing, and Jason had already expected something like that. Even his Netherworld's Forte technique was worse than the technique Milan had obtained. This meant that the highest Terra technique foreign races exchanged with humanity were probably at the Terra Advanced grade. It also meant that the foreign races should have stronger techniques than those. At the same time, it also suggested that foreign races didn't fear handing out certain techniques and guides. If one were to think logically about the provided intel, it would be better for the big clans to combine their forces and build an indestructible fortress. That was if something like that could exist and stay strong against the forces of stronger races. It was embarrassing, but humanity was considered nothing but a mere toy for most foreign races, and it was already a wonder that mankind had been able to retaliate against those foreign races for such a long time. This caused Jason to wonder if he missed something important. Not only had the infiltrating foreign races abducted several hundred children, but it was uncommon and weird that the vast majority of them were normal citizens. Were they unable to figure out which human children were talented, blessed with a good mana aptitude, and high star soul awakening? If it was like that, everything would make sense, but in that case, Jason would suspect that their intelligence was below that of mankind. Maybe the Shadow Walkers think that one's affinity is important to procreate with humans. That could be the case, and Jason could only think that the Shadow Walkers were experimenting with a few things. Most of the abducted humans had also been young women, which told Jason that they were trying to impregnate women instead of getting impregnated. However, it was not like it should work either way, because the Shadow Walkers' genetic pool was likely to be the furthest away from that of humans. At least among all three races that were currently infiltrating Canir and the archipelago. While Shadow Walkers were a darkness, or in some rare cases, shadow-attributed race whose only similarity to humans was the humanoid outer appearance, there was nothing else that was even remotely similar to the human race. At least that was what Jason knew. Meanwhile, the Doomcrawl and Viradi race had at least a physical body, which was something Jason was not sure about the Shadow Walkers. Doomcrawls were humanoid beings too, with dark purple-colored skin, 2 arms on each side, and a total of 4 eyes. They were commonly 5 meters tall with a bulky physique that highlighted their height. This made them already interesting to Jason, but more importantly was that they were a foreign race without a single affinity. Yet, their physical strength was extremely strong and superior to most foreign races. They're able to fight on par with other races that possessed affinities without any other means than their physique, which clearly demonstrated how powerful Doomcrawls were. Doomcrawls had horns protruding out of their forehead, and according to the information mankind could gather, those Doomcrawls with 2 horns were stronger than the one-horned Doomcrawls, while the size of their horns seemed to be an indicator for their combat prowess too. Yet, the most important fact about them, which was also the reason they were named Doom, was that they harbored a curse. Even if Jason found all of that intriguing, he was still doubting if the Doomcrawls were able to procreate with humans or not. However, the most likely candidate to procreate with humans was the Viradi race, because they're almost completely the same as humans, whether it was their appearance or size. Only their red, golden, or amber-colored eyes in addition to their mostly white to silver-colored hair were what made them different from humans. Viradis had paler skin than most humans, but more important than that was their innate desire to drink blood, which made them comparable to vampires. Vampires were bloodsuckers, at least if the things Jason heard from fairy tales were true. It made him believe that a humanoid race similar to those vampires existed. Was that a sign that the Viradi race was the same as the vampires from Argos' nightmare-like fairy tales? Somehow, to Jason, this was not impossible to imagine. Many beasts that had been deemed as extinct or about which had been written in fairy tales reappeared after the mana outbreak when the rifts manifested. However, in the end, Jason was not scared about the infiltration of the Viradi, Doomcrawls, or even Shadow Walkers, simply because there were only a few of them. According to Shane's intel, the number of foreign races was becoming less too. This indicated that they had found enough humans that had a suitable soul awakening according to their affinity or whatever criteria the foreign races had selected to abduct humans. It was unlikely that Jason would be found under normal circumstances. That was at least as long as he remained hidden for the time being, which was exactly what he wanted to do, even if there hadn't been the foreign races infiltration, to begin with. What worried Jason was that it didn't look like the big clans were about to stop gearing up. Shane even told him that the heads of more than 20 big clans were holding a large gathering. As someone who had nothing to do with those big clans, this gathering looked suspicious. At the same applied, this made Jason understand how big the desire to retaliate and fight against the foreign races was, even if the direct threat hailing from them was already dimming. The number of infiltrating foreign races was already dwindling, so why would the big clans start to fight against them, risking being eradicated? Instead, they could protect their prodigies by hiding them for the time being, sending them to secure locations or into solitary cultivation, instead of allowing them to roam around as if everything was perfectly fine. The big clan's decisions were irrational and weird, and even Shane and Dahlia were unable to explain Jason what exactly was going on. There was obviously something wrong, and the bad premonition he was feeling intensified when Jason heard who the person that suggested waging war against the foreign races was. It was Jael Drake, who was labeled as one of the strongest humans since he had been able to slay an ice dragon at the mid-monarch rank. The number of sovereign ranks was not exactly large, and there had yet to be a handful of humans at the mid-sovereign rank. Nevertheless, Jael Drake, who had yet to reach the mid-sovereign, had been able to slaughter a mid-monarch ranked ice dragon, which was something nobody except him could do. Chapter 395 Overthrown Island by Hydesgrain. Nobody was unsure whether it was true that only Jael was strong enough to do a feat as he did, but the number of humans who were capable enough to do that could be counted at one's hand. Most of those were probably the leader of ancient clans and blessed with great soul awakenings, a superior mana aptitude, or even in possession of a special trait. However, Jael had nothing of that. His soul awakening was only above average among the big families, at most, while his mana aptitude was great, yet not superior. Instead of a trait, he had a unique soul bond that gave him an extremely strong ice affinity, that was as strong as its mother's, while the cultivation manual to transmute his mana to that of ice mana was extremely precious. He had only obtained this manual that was labeled as a Heaven grade and the Sky Frost Spear, that had pure elemental runes engraved into it by signing a complex, yet beneficial soul contract with the Myoldra race he had encountered inside the rift where he had abducted the ice dragon egg. With blue skin, curved horns protruding out of the side of their head, sky blue eyes, and scales covering their upper body, they seemed like a ferocious race, which they were. The Myoldra race was extremely powerful, and even the youngest generation was as strong as humanity's strongest powerhouse, which everyone noticed as one of those younglings that looked similar to a young man, manifested a 30-meter-long icicle which it shot towards one of Jael's men, killing him in an instant. This shocked Jael and his underlings greatly, and they were about to die when the Myoldra race youngling stopped attacking when Jewel and everyone else released their soul bonds to fight next to them. The Myoldra race's leader was astonished, and both sides withered the chance to obtain benefits from the other party, which caused them to create a complex and lengthy soul contract that was supposed to exploit the other side. However, how should Jael have known that he was subtly influenced by everything he had obtained from the Myoldra race, slowly twisting his mind, manipulating him, turning him into a marionette without him realizing? Jael Drake was still of the opinion that everything he did was for his own benefits, and that it was his superior intelligence that allowed him to exploit a mighty race. Yet, both the manual and spear were meant to influence his mind in the direction the Myoldra race wanted. While the manual was changing Jael's mana transmutation, it also changed the instinctive repulsive behavior every living being had against certain abilities, runes, and curses. The Sky Frost Spear was powerful, yet also extremely dangerous if wrongly used, which was exactly what the Drake Patriarch did. There was one particular rune engraved inside the spear, one that was not allowed to activate while using the Skyfrost Spear. Without being aware of this, Jael Drake activated all of its runes every single time he fought with the Skyfrost Spear, which released an effect, changing the mental state of the spear wielder over time. It was similar to a slow-acting curse, one could hardly find without the necessary knowledge that humanity didn't have. As such, every time the Myoldra race exchanged goods with Jael Drake, they tested how far the curse had progressed, only to wait for the perfect timing to initiate their plan. When they heard that other foreign races started to infiltrate Argos, the individuals that were assigned to said plan sensed their chance, which was how the current situation occurred. However, nobody was aware of what happened to Jael Drake and why exactly he had changed by 360 degrees during the last few months. The vast majority thought that he turned insane after the Ice Dragon attacked the Drake clan's headquarters. Furthermore, it was unsure why Jael Drake had turned Asterix, the island he governed, into some sort of prison, but one thing was sure, living on Asterix as a prodigy was unthinkable because all of them had been taken to Canir. Meanwhile, the untalented remained on Asterix, acting as if nothing happened, trying to continue living their life peacefully. But was that even possible? Only the weak, injured, or old and untalented remained on Asterix, drastically decreasing the average combat prowess on the small island. Every single city was understaffed and the number of guards was a tenth of what it had been before Jael Drake cleansed Asterix from everyone talented. This allowed beasts to roam through all zones without anyone being able to hold them back from leaving the designated wild zone as it had been the case before. Magical and Guardian ranked beasts noticed that something had changed too. The same applied to those beasts inside the sanctum that was situated in Syro City. In the end, it didn't require much intelligence to notice that not a single human was outside the dome, searching for beasts they could hunt. As such, those beasts within the large zones they had inhabited for a long time ventured outside. Slowly, Asterix turned chaotic, and it was only when the first horde of unblemished ranked beasts pursued by a magical ranked beast accidentally entered the dome that everything had begun to change from a bad state to the worst possible. Not only did the Drake clan abduct everyone with talent, leaving those weak and untalented behind, but he didn't show any mercy at all, as he had ordered his underlings to take Asterix's resources away too. In the end, the Drake family abandoned the entire island they had governed, leaving it to the weak and all kinds of beasts that started to create a massacre inside the cities that were unable to maintain the dome's defensive measures that required a huge amount of mana to supply them consistently. Only 6 months had passed, but the whole island had already been overthrown and only a few cities had been able to avoid the worst case due to the dome's defenses that worked properly there. This was only owing to a few old, yet prominent merchants that used up their stockpiled mana stones to supply the dome with enough mana to protect them for the next few months, if not years if necessary. After that, they would have to face their inevitable death the merchants had barely postponed. When Jason heard this, he couldn't help but feel that Jael Drake was truly insane. But other than that, it also made him wonder why not a single big clan wanted to claim Asterix Island for themselves. Only when Shane explained the situation clearly, Jason began to understand the reason for the big clan's behavior. The major reason for not helping the citizens on Asterix was the fact that the benefits one could obtain on Asterix had become insignificant. What use was an empty island with destroyed cities and a population of a few untalented citizens that used up a large quantity of star notes without giving anything in return? If one were to send help, one would have to send several Lord ranks, because several humans at the Grandmagus rank wouldn't be enough to cope with the dangers on Asterix anymore. Furthermore, the Earth Dragons that had waited angsty for several months, only to notice that there was not a single young human taking away the 2 remaining Earth Dragon eggs, began to understand that something was wrong too. It was dangerous, but they had to figure out what was going on. This led one of the bravest Earth Dragons to return to the surface in the same way they had taken more than a century ago when they had been forced to enter the underground hall. After it was clear that not a single human was left, the Earth Dragon called its brethren that were shocked about the news. Time passed slowly and the Earth Dragons turned into Asterix's overlords, free from mankind's reigns. The soul contract they had signed never mentioned a case like that and only stated that they would be hunted if they were to return to the surface. However, who was going to punish them, now that nobody governed Asterix anymore? Sending out several Lord ranks would be dangerous after the Earth Dragons regained the complete combat prowess too. As such, the dangers and expenses to reclaim Asterix were not worth the benefits one could obtain. The only benefit most big clans could see was the large mana vein, but that was everything valuable left on Asterix. Rather than gaining something, it was more likely to bring losses. Jason could understand their reasoning to some extent. If they had to send one of their few sovereign ranks, who knew what would happen in those dangerous times that were about to start? From the looks of it, big clans didn't seem to trust each other anymore, and even the gathering should be a charade led by several foreign races that remained in the shadows. It was the sad truth, but Jason had to acknowledge that it was not feasible to reclaim and save those who had survived on Asterix until now. At least not right now. Even though some hunters wanted to help, they wouldn't dare to venture to Asterix, in fear that they might be abducted from the Drake family that could return suddenly, without notice, forcing them into signing an enslavement-like soul contract, or to die. In times like these, nobody knew what was going on, and Jason was sure that not even the big clans could get the hang of the whole, big picture. Maybe something would change in the next months, but Jason doubted it. Reality was cruel, but those without powers or connections could only accept their fate or fight against it with all their might. Chapter 396, Using One's Disadvantage as Advantage by Hydesgrain. Humanity was still not at its worst, as the mana outbreak and emergence of the rifts more than 3 centuries ago were far worse, but right now, nobody felt secure or protected anymore. Not even the big families were able to announce that they were confident in their own strength right now, which was something that had rarely occurred. From the beginning, those families had the best capabilities and fewest casualties compared to the untalented citizens or unfortunate clans that had to face beasts much stronger than they were. In the end, Jason couldn't help but feel that the situation they currently faced had been worsened due to the Drake clan's actions. Abandoning Asterix was one point, but suggesting to wage war and announce a gathering even though most invaders of foreign races had already left Canea was suspicious. If one were to think about it, this could only be a trap, and Jason doubted that the other big clans were unaware of that too. Adding the fact that the Drake clan was unlikely to intend fighting against all big clans at once, alone at that, Jason was sure that the foreign clan supporting Jaildrake planned something too. However, the same should apply to the other foreign races. That was if they were able to comprehend what Jaildrake and the foreign race supporting him were planning to do. This was highly likely, and Jason began to wonder when the charade would be uncovered, revealing everyone's real intention and the races behind them. Yet, more importantly for Jason were 2 points. He was not allowed to be found because he had yet to find a way to conceal the fact that he was a halfling from the Celestia race, while the other point was that he had to become stronger, as fast as possible. The former point was something Jason had no idea about how to solve. Not only was there a weird aura around him according to the transmitted thoughts he had received from the Earth Dragon, but apparently his eyes were similar yet not as distinct as his aura. As such, he had to find a way to conceal his aura too. Otherwise, he would have to face a few foreign races and the possible wrath, greed, or jealousy. Nobody could promise him that other races would react similarly to the Shadow Walker. Thus, concealing his aura was important too. Other than that, he had yet to create his second sub-area and reach the Lick stage. Furthermore, Jason allowed both Artemis and Scorpio to advance their strength now that he didn't receive a single percentage from his soul amplification anymore. He could exploit his weakened state like this. At the same time advance his mana core rank, once he had found a great location to absorb a lot of mana without being interrupted by other races or someone else. The large mana vein below Syro City was even more alluring than it had been before, because the only living beings that could attack him there were beasts. There was a beast whose potential colors he had never seen before, but it had been hibernating for 3 centuries, meaning that there shouldn't be an issue with that. As such, instead of staying on Terebrine inside the small city Shane and Dahlia owned a house, he decided to use his nullified amplification to the fullest extent. Turning to Dahlia, he asked, "If it's not too much of a hurry, can I use the mind-splitting technique, like right now? I know that I woke up only a few hours ago, but I don't think that I should waste too much time. Even more so after hearing what is currently happening on Canir and other archipelagos." Both Dahlia and Shane expected that something similar to that would happen, while Emily was also similar to Jason. She felt extremely weak, like a pushover, and wanted to become stronger as soon as possible. However, she didn't dare to refine her brain because Dahlia and Shane had yet to acquire another brain protection treasure. If they hadn't promised Jason that they would be able to procure the brain protection treasure for his second sub, they would have given the one they were able to obtain to Emily. Yet, Jason was the most talented, with a great soul awakening, superior mana aptitude, and even more important, a great mindset. Adding his soul bond's potential, it was difficult to compare to Jason, which was what Emily understood fully. Furthermore, once Jason was strong enough, he could protect the people around him and prevent a war between humans to break out. This wouldn't mean he would be able to fight against the foreign races, but Jason was sure that most stronger individuals of foreign races had something better to do than fighting against each other to procure a few more soldiers, or whatever humans had been used for by them. Thinking back to the time where the 3 foreign races appeared in Syro City, it was obvious how astonished the Ganassia and Deep-Sea Scion race envoys had been when they saw the Shadow Walker, who was said to be a prodigy from the younger generation. Thus, one could say that it was more likely to send lower-ranked individuals to Argos as long as nothing special happened. On the other hand, once the first stronger individual from a foreign race was sent over, other races would follow soon, which was definitely not something mankind wanted to witness. In the end, Emily couldn't do anything against those foreign races because she was way too slow in accumulating mana and becoming stronger, while Jason seemed different than her. As such, she remained quiet and followed her master, Shane, and Jason without saying anything. Barely 10 minutes later, Jason stood within a large magic circle that was intertwined with multiple mana isolation, a mana vortex and dissolution runes. Those runes were supposed to dissolve all mana stones, gather the mana in the center of the room, and isolate everything that happened from the outside. Meanwhile, the mana isolation rune was also supposed to prevent mana from leaving the magic circle, and Jason felt like he had to face a déjà vu right now. However, instead of being scared, he knew what he was supposed to do, and there was nothing that could hinder him in following his dream and desire to become stronger. Taking revenge on his mother was one goal, but rescuing the whole Flay family and protecting everyone else who was important to him was even more important. Once everything would be over, he might be able to venture to other planets and see how strong other races truly were, but that was something for the future and nothing he should think about right now. With the small jade-enveloped box in his hands, Jason approached the magic circle's center while Shane threw out a huge bulk of mana stones to fill the whole magic circle at once. That should be more than enough. Give your best and finish it quickly. I can't promise if the isolation runes are perfect because I had to intertwine everything, making one rune out of all of them. As such faint mana fluctuations might leak, all right. Jason nodded his head, understanding that they might be exposed if he were to take too long. Taking out the fruit, called Ascor Brain Merua Protecto, Jason noticed that it was not enveloped in a particular color or the mysterious color Artemis and the unhatched petrification serpent were enveloped with. This indicated that the fruit didn't have a great quality. However, from the looks of it, its mana fluctuations and everything Jason saw within the fruit spoke for the opposite. This allowed Jason to tell that the quality might not be perfect but that its grade was extremely high. Gobbling down the tennis ball-sized fruit in 3 bites, Jason sat down as he activated the large magic circle at once. Manifesting around him, Jason was able to perceive the magic circle's capabilities and the Ascor brain Merua Proteco fruit's effect directly. Enveloped by a thick green membrane, his brain was protected and seemingly even recuperating without the need for Jason to do anything. As such, he could take a deep breath as he began to absorb the dissolved mana that was drawn to the vortex that manifested within the large mana vortex rune chain inscribed into the center of the magic circle. Jason didn't ask his soul bonds to do anything, but before he had started to refine his brain, Artemis, Scorpio and even Solaris accessed their fortified soul conjunction with him to transfer Jason's pain. When he sensed this, he couldn't help but feel the warmth rising in his heart as he started to exert the mind-splitting technique according to its described way. Endless pain spread through his brain as it was refined, but only a moment later, Jason could hear his soul bonds screaming out in pain while his pain had been reduced drastically. Chapter 397 One Step at a Time by Hydesgrain. Jason stiffened when he felt searing pain that had already been reduced to a quarter of what it should be, spreading through his body. It was shocking how painful refining his second suba was, but comparing it to the first time where he had yet to establish a fortified soul conjunction with any of his soul bonds, Jason didn't feel like he should be complaining. The first time was much more painful, which mainly stemmed from the fact that he had to eat the devilish Valkyrie shield fruit that caused greater pain than the brain refinement did. This was now different because the brain protection fruit he ate did nothing but protect and recuperate his brain, preventing any type of serious damage to his brain. As such, he suppressed the pain and tried to ignore it as well as possible before he focused on the task at hand. First, Jason had to refine his brain before he had to split up a small part of it. After that, he could decide for what he wanted to use the second sub-area that could do almost everything passively. That was if the process was not too taxing to do passively. Jason was not sure if it would affect each other, but having two sub-areas with different tasks shouldn't repulse each other. At least Shane told him so. While the first sub-area would stay like it was, the second sub-area wouldn't be able to use the whole capabilities the first sub-area had. This was also the reason why most descendants of big clans established only one sub-area or at most two in order to create a passive mana gathering cycle and a soul energy increment cycle. In the end, this was exactly what Jason wanted to do too. Even if his soul energy would only increase by 1% per day, it would generate a huge amount of soul energy units as time passed. In several months he should be able to increase his soul energy by 1,000 units a day, and Jason couldn't help but feel like most patriarchs had several million vacant soul energy units without any use for them. This was mainly because they were unable to catch and form a contract with a stronger beast and the fact that their soul world was fully occupied. The latter was less of a problem, but the former was problematic because it would take some time before mankind would reach higher ranks, allowing them to catch and restrict stronger beasts. Little did he know that everyone was accumulating soul energy desperately. Jason had fewer problems than those humans because he was now in possession of 3 soul bonds without potential, while Scorpio's potential was restricted. Yet, after Solaris evolved into a Tier 1 origin flame, it should be able to purify Scorpio's body from a small amount of impurities. However, they had to test out if this was truly possible, or else, Scorpio might be injured while experimenting, which was not something Jason wanted to see. Solaris, Artemis, and the unhatched petrification serpent didn't have any potential, or rather Jason felt like he was unable to see it, which was exactly the same with humans and those foreign races. They had the same mysterious hue around them, even though it was a little bit different to his soulbond's hue. Several hours had passed since Jason had started to refine his brain while his soulbonds endured Jason's pain with him. I expected him to scream out in pain or suffer more. It's good that he looks fine, Shane said, visibly relieved that Jason didn't have to endure too much pain. As Dahlia said, "You forgot that he has multiple fortified soul conjunctions, right? He and his soul bonds share the pain amongst each other, otherwise, he would definitely despair right now. The creation of the first Suba is nothing in comparison to the second one. If he didn't have such a firm bond with his soul bonds and fortified soul conjunctions, I wouldn't have allowed him to create his second sub-area. Shane could only nod his head when Dahlia said this, while Emily flinched every time Jason's lips twitched in pain. "Do I have to endure that pain too?" she mumbled, thinking that it might be more painful to become stronger than she had expected. "Not really. With enough time I could have concocted a unique potion called Pain Nullifying Potion. The person who drinks this potion won't feel any pain for an entire week and is much stronger than some painkillers. On the contrary, one would have problems absorbing mana for a whole month. Jason is not only enduring the pain without such a potion, but the pace at which he processes everything is much faster than one would normally refine his brain. At least under normal circumstances, if one wanted to avoid enduring too much pain at once. I think he is afraid of Shane's warning about the leaking mana. Jason prevents mana from leaking by absorbing it as fast as possible. As such, the mana has not a single moment to search for an area to escape." After Dahlia explained everything, Emily sighed in relief before her respect for Jason skyrocketed as she realized what her master had said. He absorbs the mana, preventing it from leaking out of a mana isolation magic circle. And why didn't he ask Dahlia to concoct him a pain nullifying potion? Does he think that's wasting time, or maybe he thinks that has no time left? Staring at Jason, who was sweating profusely, not knowing what kind of determination and ambition one needed to attain firm willpower as Jason had, Emily couldn't help but be in awe. 24 hours had passed since Jason started to refine his brain when he was finally done with this step. Now he had to split his mind, which was equally painful if not even more. Taking a deep breath, he followed the splitting mind technique's guide and split a small part of his mind to create the second sub-area while screaming out in pain. Meanwhile, his soul world was filled with screams, and Jason couldn't help but sever the connection with his soul bonds, taking on the remaining pain by himself. There were only a few minutes he had to endure everything, and Jason didn't want his soul bonds to receive trauma from the pain he had to endure. As such, he had decided to bear the pain alone, only to notice how horrific it was, and his scream intensified. Barely able to retain his consciousness, 30 minutes passed until Jason's second sub-area was finally constructed. His mind didn't receive any kind of backlashes, which was great, but he felt extremely exhausted as he slumped on the ground where Jason laid down. After he had finished establishing his second sub-area, Jason's consciousness remained fully awake, yet his body had entered a weakened state. Looking at the ceiling, he felt extremely tired, yet energized at the same time, as the remaining mana that was gathering in the mana vortex rune above him was absorbed by his mana eyes, whose desire for mana increased with every day passing. Jason couldn't explain what exactly his mana eyes were, but they were definitely something unique, and he didn't even realize that they were able to absorb mana slowly without him doing anything. The mana his first sub-area absorbed increased as the gathered mana was directly transferred to his mana eyes. His mana eyes released a faint golden glow, which was the cause for the passive mana gathering to accelerate until the last trace of mana was fully absorbed into his mana eyes. He was not sure what was going on, but it was definitely not something bad, considering that he could passively absorb lots of mana into his mana eyes as long as he could do something else actively. As such, it shouldn't be problematic. Now, let's see how I can create the continuous soul energy cycle to receive the best result before taking the next step. Chapter 398, Soul Energy Cycle by Hydesgrain. After he finished creating his second sub-area, Jason intended to rest for a few hours, only to notice that he was unable to do so. His mind was rattling with things he had left to do before resting, which was not only annoying but also painful. He had barely refined his brain, and now his mind was already working as if it was a machine. Creating the continuous soul energy cycle was easier said than done, because he had only 16,000 soul energy units left after the Soul World Core absorbed 10,000 units to record everything about the race-specific weakening curse it was forced to harbor. At the same time, the soul energy units that were left unused out of the bunch of 10,000 units had been used up to create the curse-controlling marble. This was just what Jason had comprehended from the information he had received. It was more likely that he was wrong, but to make everything easier to understand, he told himself that it was as he was assuming. Maybe the Soul World core obtained the necessary energy to create the 2 new runes and the marble that was able to contain, activate and restrain the curse from somewhere else, like using his life force or his nutrition, mana, energy, and soul energy altogether. However, there was no way to prove any of those theories. It was already over either way, and the important point was that he had only 16,000 soul energy units left. Other than that, the unhatched petrification serpent's curse was adjustable, which was interesting to know. The latter was less important for the continuous soul energy cycle he was currently creating, but the former was crucial in this case. One needed a certain amount of soul energy units to construct a properly working continuous soul energy cycle which one's sub-area could control without any problems. For example, the passive mana gathering technique was simple. It created a small vortex that absorbed the surrounding mana before leading it through one's upper body's mana veins. This was only one circle and was already enough to annex the absorbed mana. After that, it would be stored inside the mana core that one was supposed to nurture. In the end, there were 2, at most 3 steps necessary. First, create a small vortex to absorb mana. Second, lead the absorbed mana through the mana veins until it has been annexed. Third, store the annexed mana into the mana core. This was everything, but the second step was already considered extremely difficult for a passive technique one's sub-area was barely capable to achieve. If Jason were to establish the passive mana gathering technique in his second sub-area, this wouldn't work properly owing to the fact that the first sub-area was the strongest. Splitting one's mind divided a small part, at the size of around 1% to 3% of one's mind, if one were to put it in numbers. During the cultivation process, one receives an overall enhancement in every characteristic for every level and rank one breaks through. This would mean that one's mind would also receive this enhancement. The splitted mind was included in this enhancement as well as the main area was. While the first sub-area split 3% of one's mind, if one were to put it in numbers, the second sub-area was said to split 2% out of the remaining main area of one's mind. After that, this part would become smaller with every sub-area one could obtain. Thus, the first sub-area was always stronger and more capable of doing something greater than the second, third, fourth, and so on. As such, only the first sub-area was efficient and strong enough to follow the slightly more complex steps of the passive mana gathering. Shaking his head, Jason had to disregard using the first sub-area to create the continuous soul energy cycle, which would result in having a higher increment of soul energy per day. This effect would be created due to the first sub-area's higher capabilities compared to establishing the continuous soul energy cycle in the second sub-area. With that in mind, he created the continuous soul energy cycle in the second sub-area while testing if 16,000 soul energy units were enough to do so. Under normal circumstances, one would need close to 50,000 soul energy units to do something like this. However, Jason's soul energy replenishing speed was 4 times faster than the average of all recorded soul awakenings had. Compared to others, whose soul energy required 24 hours to replenish fully, his soul energy was fully replenished after 6 hours, which made a huge difference. Because of this advancement he had, Jason was not required to have 50,000 soul energy units, neither 25,000 nor 16,000 soul energy units. In the end, he had enough soul energy units to create a common continuous soul energy cycle that was at the same time the only soul energy cycle one could establish in one's second sub-area. After Jason had completed every step, the soul energy cycle would follow the instructions he gave the sub-area, and as long as he didn't instruct the sub-area wrong, increasing his soul energy by around 0.8% minus 1% per day should work perfectly. A moment later, he forced himself to stand up before he took a look inside his soul world, where he glanced at the soul energy circle that was in fact the cycle he created. There was one entrance and one exit for his soul energy, and it was an endless cycle he created. With a faint smile on his lips, he turned around to look at Artemis, Scorpio, and Solaris, who seemed to be exhausted. Looking at Artemis, Jason did only now remember that her wings had been heavily injured before he left the mythic garden. Approaching Artemis, he took a look at her wings that seemed to be fine when he sensed that everyone craved for his attention. Artemis rubbed her head at Jason, Scorpio used his stinger and pincer to tug and poke him, while Solaris floated around him happily. Only the unhatched petrification serpent remained unmoving, and it was at the same exact position at which it had been after it had formed the soul bond contract with Jason and entered his soul world. He didn't have much to say about this, but he decided to ignore his other 3 soul bonds for a moment to approach the unmoving egg. You can take all the time you need to overcome your agony. But don't suppress your emotions, we are a family now. If you feel like it, release your aura however you want, nobody will judge you, even less inside my soul world. Otherwise, I'll ignore them for a month or 2, hee. Jason tried to get through to the petrification serpent, but he didn't receive an answer. But that was not something he wanted to accomplish in the first place. What he wanted to do was to show the petrification serpent that he and his soul bonds wouldn't treat it badly, and that it could release all kinds of emotions it suppressed. They were a family now and shouldn't have to hide something in front of each other. After he had told the unhatched petrification serpent what he had wanted to, Jason turned around to Artemis, Scorpio, and Solaris, who stared at him in shock. No caresses and no teasing, was what they seemed to think, and Jason couldn't help but smile lightly. As long as you don't tease the petrification serpent in its current state, all of you will get your caresses. Just treat it like you treat each other. However, when he thought about the latter part, he quickly added, forget the last part, just treat the petrification serpent as you treat me rather than treating it like you treat each other. He knew that Artemis and Scorpio were more like rivals, while Solaris had been avoided by both Artemis and Scorpio. It had only been a few months since Solaris had been accepted by Artemis and Scorpio. This was mainly because it had helped and rescued Jason a few times, indicating that it was on their side and not as evil and destructive as their instincts told them. As such, Jason thought that it would be much better if his 3 soul bonds treated their new family member better than they had treated each other in the beginning. Thinking about it, Jason thought that their start was difficult, but time tied his soul bonds closer to each other, and Jason knew that he couldn't live without them anymore. After he took care of everyone within his soul world, he decided to leave it for the time being because he had something else to take care of. Jason walked out of the magic circle towards his masters and Emily as he said, I don't know what exactly all of you plan to do, but I would like to make a trip to Asterix's large mana vein for the next few months. After breaking into the lick stage, I'll feel more comfortable. I don't know why, but I can sense something essential will changes when I liquefy my mana, but I can't grasp what it might be. He was not sure what exactly might change, but his entire being released the desire to break into the lick stage, and Jason couldn't tell why. The only clear fact was that right now was the best period to break into the lick stage, at a place with lots of mana that not a single human would enter right now. Chapter 399 Return by Hydesgrain. It would be a lie if Shane and Dahlia were to say that hiding on Asterix was a stupid idea, and Jason's plan could be considered quite clever. Not only Jason, with his nullified soul amplification, could profit by entering Asterix's large mana vein, but Emily, with a 5% soul amplification and her lesser Typhoon Rock that had yet to reach the awakened rank, would receive astronomical benefits too. In half a year, she should be able to reach the first master rank at the bare minimum. Rather than that, it was more likely that she could reach an even higher mana core rank as long as the lesser Typhoon Rock tried to suppress its advancement to the lick stage. 6 months were only an example which Jason had stated because that was how long it would need for the curse-controlling marble within his soul world core to be recharged. After that, it was possible to change the settings of his cores to switch in and activate the adjusted curse. Jason had yet to think carefully about what adjustments he wanted to take, but before he could think about that, he had to take every little detail into account, and that was only possible when he was about to reach the lick stage. Adjusting anything before liquefying his mana would be a waste of time, and thus, Jason set himself a new goal. Reach the lick stage in 6 months. This goal would mean that he had to give up on his previous goal, which he had told the Flays, breaking into the lick stage before the end of the year. This was a beautiful goal, but unfortunately his high soul amplification was a huge obstacle to achieve his goal. He had already reached the combat prowess of the lowest lick stage for a short time, but that was in the past. Now that his soul amplification had been nullified, his combat prowess was unknown. His physical strength and mana core size were comparable to that of a 4th master ranks, but adding the 3 affinities his soul bonds inherited to him, his strength reached an unknown degree. In the end, each of his affinities had reached the strength of the lowest lick stage too. After his soul amplification had been nullified, Jason found it useless to restrict his soul bonds, or rather Artemis' advancement to the lick stage. As such, Artemis had started to liquefy the mana she had already stored in her mana core in order to create 1 drop of mana. Under normal circumstances, this would take some time, but even Scorpio reached the lowest lick stage quickly because he had already created his mana core and had stored enough mana to liquefy into the first drop of mana. Solaris was slightly different because he was Jason's soul bond that caused the most chaos while creating its mana core. Meanwhile, the unhatched petrification serpent shouldn't have any problems creating its mana core because the color enveloping it was similar if not the same as Artemis. Furthermore, the petrification serpent mother was at the low lick stage and there shouldn't be any problems with his newest soul bond. At least if one were to focus on its talent and racial potential. The only uncertain factor about the unhatched petrification serpent was whether it would be able to overcome its mother's death, shortly after it had been kidnapped. If it were to think that the petrification serpent's mother's death was caused because of its abduction, the unhatched petrification serpent was likely to have to face a few issues. Jason knew that it was different, but he would have to wait patiently before intervening in his 4th soul bond's trauma. Forcing anything on the unhatched beast was not what he was supposed to do and might even worsen the situation. After pondering about it for a bit, both Shane and Dahlia found Jason's idea even better than they initially thought. They wouldn't have to be afraid to have a scarcity of mana around them, but on the other hand, the sheer mass of medical solutions they required would be devastating. However, that was not considered a problem for Shane, Dahlia, or even Jason because they had more than enough funds to purchase everything they wanted. Suddenly Shane said, "I purchased a few special ores and other materials too. During the next few months, I had planned to teach you how to forge a proper soul weapon. However, now that your Black Origin flame, I mean Solaris, evolved into a Tier 1 flame and its purity ability improved, we might as well advance further and improve a different aspect too. I think Dahlia's opinion is the same. Your conservatory's water tank should be empty soon, but you can use the herbs and plants inside to concoct higher-ranked potions. If my estimation is not wrong, we can hasten up our plans by a few months, maybe even a year. That is if Solaris purification ability and proficiency over the flame reaches the degree you told us about. As such, we could teach you and Emily everything about the lifestyle occupation." We handed Emily the translation of the Netherworld's fort technique you made too, and we tried to figure out if we could adjust it somehow, but, unfortunately enough, we can't change the fire affinity requirement. However, that should be fine. That only means Emily will focus more on absorbing mana while you have to focus on both absorbing mana and refining your body. Why is he talking so much? Is it because he can teach me about forging again? Jason asked himself with a faint smile on his face before he averted his gaze to Dahlia, who threw a faint smile towards him. "Let's go. You told us about a hibernating beast, but if the worst case scenario occurs and it wakes up, we should notice this early enough, I guess. In that case, Shane will bring us away in the fastest way." Other than that we can't do much, at least not with the foreign races invading humanity territories as they please. To think that I hear something like that from Master, our situation is really not that great. Emily thought when she recalled how wise and knowledgeable her master normally was. However, she just said, I would like to go too. Right now, every place seems to be dangerous. From what I heard, all beasts that had been forced to live underground re-emerged to the surface. Doesn't that mean there are only a few beasts near the Mana vein? Emily was not entirely wrong with her assumption, yet, most beasts would rather stay near the Mana vein than distancing themselves from it by returning to the surface. As such, she was not right either. There were a few beasts that reached their racial limit and felt uncomfortable living underground, like the earth dragons as an example. Both facts, having reached their racial limit and being uncomfortable living underground, were good reasons to re-emerge to the surface. Dahlia explained this to Emily, who could only nod her head as she said, So there should be a few strong beasts nearby the Mana vein, will we be fine? Shane just smiled and said yes, to which Jason added inwardly, as long as that hibernating beast with the azure silver hue around doesn't wake up. Let's purchase everything we need and depart as soon as possible. Staying on Terebrine shouldn't be that safe anymore too. During the last months, I saw 3 invaders from the Viradi race flying over our small city. They might search through the smaller cities soon. Everyone nodded their head, and Jason was already about to purchase high-grade medical solutions when he saw multiple notifications from Silas, his employee. Fuck, I completely forgot about him. He knew that his shop had been doing fine, even without a high supply of goods which he had to restrict due to his departure to the Mythic Garden, but Silas had been working hard during the last few months and paid according to the stated salary. However, now that Jason was about to leave Terebrine for a longer time, Silas would end up unemployed. He felt bad about that as he saw that Silas requested the termination of their contract. Sighing deeply, Jason responded to the message that was already several days ago. You did a good job. Thank you very much. Check your bank account, there is a small bonus for you. Never give up and work hard to accomplish whatever you dream of. Even if the message sounded a little bit too much, Jason was genuinely thankful to Silas, and instead of writing an empty message without much meaning to his ex-employee, Jason sent him 10 million credits. Since his shop had opened, Jason earned more than 1,000 star notes, and it was mostly thanks to Silas, who worked hard to attract more customers. As such, he couldn't help but give him a bonus of more than 30,000% of his normal salary. For Jason, this was not an exorbitant number, but Silas was shocked when he had seen this message the day after Jason messaged him. He had been poor since his birth, forced to work hard, but now after he met Jason, who treated him justly, he gave him a huge bonus because he resigned. This felt weird, and Silas couldn't help but feel guilty, which caused him to message Jason once again. However, after that day he had never heard from him ever again. Above Syro City, Asterix. 2 days had passed since Jason, his masters and Emily decided to depart to Asterix in order to enter the closer proximity of the large Mana vein. Emerging outside the spatial portal, the first thing they smelled was a foul stench permeating the air as Emily screamed out in fright. Chapter 400 Once in a Lifetime Opportunity by Hydesgrain. Standing within the city that had been destroyed after the beasts inside the sanctuary broke out, Jason couldn't help but sigh. Looking through the destroyed streets that were littered with dead corpses and beasts feasting on them, he heard Emily vomiting her breakfast next to him. Jason didn't felt good, seeing so many dead corpses either, but he was definitely better off than Emily. She didn't seem to have control over her body anymore, and the only thing Jason could do was to pat her back. Because Shane was not sure how dangerous it would be to create a spatial portal right next to the Mana vein, whose coordination he didn't have to, they decided to take another way. Instead of using spatial portals, they would descend the shaft. It was easier and attracted less attention. It was not like Shane or Dahlia had to be careful of any lick stage beast in their surroundings, but those hidden beasts at the Prisma stage with solidified prismarine crystals might turn into annoying opponents once attracted. Jason had perceived only one of such dangerous beasts in the surrounding area of the Mana vein, but that was already several months ago and many things had changed. As such, several hours had passed before they had found and descended the shaft that led them to the base. After that, they had to search for a path that would lead them closer to the Mana vein without attracting too much attention. That was not as difficult as everyone expected because Jason's Mana eyes were able to see through everything much better after he had started to absorb the dense and pure mana released from the Mana vein. As such, it didn't take a long time before they found a suitable area where they would stay for the next few months. There were only a few beasts in their surroundings and even less to pay attention to. Jason was already excited, and without wasting any time, his pores opened as he began to absorb the mana radiating from the Mana vein greedily. Sensing how dense and pure the mana he absorbed was, he couldn't help but smile brightly as he summoned his soul bonds so that they could make use of the mana too. Artemis and Scorpio were familiar with a Mana vein. Even if it was one at a lower level, it made them scream out in joy as they knew how beneficial it was. Meanwhile, Solaris was able to make use of the fact that it had already annexed 3,000 soul energy units as it started to absorb mana too. This was something it had to do in order to make use of its mana core, and instead of using Jason's mana as it had always done, Solaris was able to gather mana for itself now. Meanwhile, even the unhatched petrification serpent was not completely unaffected by the Mana vein's mana that started to envelop and infiltrates the small green blackish egg. When Jason saw that everyone was affected by the Mana vein, he couldn't help but smile as he said, "Let's give our best during the next few months." 6 months later. Half a year had passed since Jason, his masters and Emily entered the nearby areas of the large Mana vein as a gigantic stream of mana was suddenly drawn out of it. Without warning, the enormous amount of mana within shot towards Jason and the others, who were suddenly forced out of the concentrated mana absorption state. Only Jason, who was already enveloped in a faint membrane of the purest mana, didn't move a single inch, while everyone else, who was woken up, retreated subconsciously a few dozen meters from the prior position. Even Shane and Dahlia couldn't help but retreat without being aware of it as they sensed the aura Jason was releasing. "He is breaking through," Shane mumbled as he retreated further. Jason's aura suddenly changed from that of extreme calmness and focus to that of an almighty being that was able to destroy everything in its surrounding with the snap of its finger. The aura was white in color, and intertwined with something divine, yet, it vanished as soon as it had appeared. Everyone who felt this couldn't help but be shocked as their body began to tremble. However, this shock did not only stem from the fact that Jason's aura changed for a moment into something unfathomable, but rather that everyone was suddenly kneeling. Nobody was excluded, even Shane or Jason's soul bonds had to kneel down as if they were instinctively submissive to the aura Jason had released for a short moment. However, before anyone could take a closer look at the aura, it had already vanished. Instead of thinking that this was something bad, everyone sighed in relief. This almighty aura traces of a white, holy hue within it, but it was incomparable to Dahlia's constitution. If Dahlia's aura, which she released while purifying beasts, was already holy, then Jason's aura was that of a true god, suppressing everything in its surrounding. This aura was a mixture between a bright white hue, a golden color, and a distinct, silver color that was comparable to a starlight stream. It looked magnificent, but the pressure it released pervaded the area several kilometers around him before it had been retracted. Nevertheless, it had woken up every single beast in their surrounding. The mighty hibernating beast had been able to perceive the aura too, waking it up. However, instead of fury or anger, it felt fear instilled within it, only to notice that the aura was retracted. After that, it couldn't help but stare at the direction from which it felt the aura as it saw something it had never expected to see. The primal awakening of one's bloodline. But isn't that a One could hardly comprehend what the being, that was situated in the core of the mana vein was thinking of, but shock revered through its entire being as it understood what kind of being had its primal awakening next to him. A halfling from a superior or ancient race here. How? The beast was unaware of what happened during the last 300 years, but it was sure that someone like the halfling it saw shouldn't exist. Neither on Argos nor anywhere else. Nevertheless, instead of attacking or fleeing from Jason as it initially wanted to do, it sensed that Jason's strength was insignificant. As such, without pondering about it, the beast manifested a spatial portal below Jason, who appeared next to the beast only a moment later. The spatial affinity was one of the beast's affinities and it did everything without much issues. Jason was completely oblivious to what happened, and the only thing he noticed was that the mana in his surroundings increased manifold while he couldn't even tell if there were any impurities within the mana he absorbed. His eyes were closed and he didn't bother to look at the surrounding mana more intently to determine its purity, yet, Jason could tell that his location had changed. Nevertheless, instead of being afraid, the surrounding mana seemed to tell him that everything was fine. Had he known that he absorbed mana right next to a 10-meter tall being that looked like a mixture of a bear and an owl, he wouldn't feel like this. The complete body structure was that of a bear while its appearance was that of an owl. But that was not even what one should be afraid of, because the most terrifying aspect was the fact that it had solidified 9 prismarine crystals. Furthermore, it seemed that 3 of those prismarine crystals were about to be enveloped by one, larger and refined membrane. Now, release the aura of higher comprehension. The surrounding mana should be more than enough. The beryl thought as it was reminded of its childhood where it had seen the primal awakening of a being from a grand race. The aura this being had released during its awakening was useful for all kinds of beasts, allowing them to gain insights or even to break through the current shackles. This was exactly what the beryl wanted to receive from Jason in exchange for bringing him to the mana vein's central area that possessed the densest and purest mana. Meanwhile, Shane and the others were shocked that Jason vanished just like that, and the only fact that caused his masters to retain level-headed was that Artemis, Scorpio, Solaris, and even Petri, the small petrification serpent that had hatched not long ago, remained calm as if nothing had or would happen to Jason. The only thing that bothered them was the point that the being that brought Jason away wanted to exploit him, or rather the primal awakening of his bloodline. Jason's soulbonds noticed that something essential about Jason was about to change and that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for most beasts to be close to him. However, this didn't include those beasts connected to Jason because they received all kinds of benefits that he was about to release subconsciously, within his aura.